your association today. We're very fortunate to have you, your association.
Hare Krishna.
I'll give a quick introduction and then His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj is a disciple of, senior disciple of Srila Prabhupada. Was initiated in 1971, and Srila Prabhupada instructed him specifically on the aspect of deity worship. So he became an authority on this topic, great inspiration for many devotees around the world, preaches in Krishna consciousness, many parts, especially Japan, Malaysia, Russia, and South India. So his GBC currently in Chennai and other places, and Japan and other places. And Maharaj has translated so many books, specifically astounding one is the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, word to word, verse by verse, quoting Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Thakur and Jiva Goswami and other Acharya. I personally, myself, I have it. I refer time to time. And Nectar Devotions, Prabhupada books against that. So really, I'm personally very grateful, Maharaj, for giving your association in terms of your books and translation. Extraordinary work. Thank you so much.
Okay, we should begin.
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay. Namo Vishnu Padaya Kripasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Sridhavadi Pastachadesha Tarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Gaur Bhaktivedanta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare. So I was supposed to speak on Gopal Goswami, isn't it? In honor of his appearance day. So Gopal Bhatta Goswami was one of the 6 Goswamis in Vrindavan, and he met Lord Chaitanya, first of all, in South India, in Sri Rangam, when Lord Chaitanya, after he took sannyas, went walking on pilgrimage for about 6 years. So he came to South India, and he came to the Sri Rangam temple, and he stayed there for 4 months, which was quite a long time because usually he just stayed a few days in one place. But he stayed there for 4 months, particularly because it was Chaturmasya. When he came there, of course, he was just an unknown sannyasi, but because he displayed such devotion to the deity of Ranganath, that big deity there, and he was singing with such devotion that one of the priests at the temple, Venkat Bhatta, was very impressed, and he took him into his house, and he stayed in his house for 4 months. And during that time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had lots of conversations with him. So Venkat Bhatta was a follower of Ramanuja Sampradaya, and they worship Vishnu. And he was very learned as well, Venkat Bhatta, and devoted to that form of Vishnu that he worshipped. So that it came in a very traditional family. And still that family is there. The descendants of Venkat Bhatta still live there next to the temple in Sri Rangam. So their traditional family has continued for maybe 1,000 years or so, who knows, a very, very long time anyway. Lord Chaitanya would speak to him often. And sometimes the small child of Venkat Bhatta, that was Gopal Bhatta, would be there. And Lord Chaitanya would sometimes play with him or hold him in his arms, etc. Gopal Bhatta got some association with Lord Chaitanya, and he got attraction for Lord Chaitanya as well. And of course, Venkat Bhatta, because he was a devotee of Vishnu, then he could not give up that worship. Though Lord Chaitanya would joke with him and tell him that Krishna is very, very attractive, so attractive that even Lakshmi Devi becomes desirous of entering into the Ras Leela, but she can't even get in. So this shows the greatness of attraction to Krishna. Venkat Bhatta, he never gave up that worship of Vishnu for Krishna. But Gopal Bhatta, he became very attracted to Krishna and to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And when Lord Chaitanya finally left, Gopal Bhatta actually wanted to go with him. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu encouraged him to stay and not leave, but to support his parents, as was tradition. And of course, he should also study, learn Sanskrit, learn logic, and learn all sorts of types of knowledge that would be useful for him. So Lord Chaitanya left, and of course, then he went back to Puri, and then he sent the Goswamis to Vrindavan, and then Lord Chaitanya stayed in Puri. But after Venkat Bhatta disappeared, that was some years later, when Gopal Bhatta was grown up and had finished his studies, then Gopal Bhatta decided he would go and join the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he went to Vrindavan, where he met with Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis. Of course, to do this, he had to travel by foot. So he had to walk all the way up to Vrindavan. And he was welcomed by the Goswamis there, who informed Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that Gopal Bhatta had arrived. And Lord Chaitanya was very, very happy that after so many years, Gopal Bhatta had remembered as his first desires when he had met Lord Chaitanya. So he sent him a piece of his kopan and some cloth as out of respect for Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So Gopal Bhatta Goswami, of course, was very dedicated to Krishna, and that's why he went to Vrindavan. Unlike his father, who remained worshipping Vishnu, Gopal Bhatta Goswami was attracted to Krishna. He was also educated by Prabodhananda Saraswati, who happened to be his uncle. He was also very learned and a great devotee of Krishna. So anyway, he was in Vrindavan there, and he was assisting the Goswamis at their work. In the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami, there at the very beginning, Jiva Goswami, in his introduction, 2 verses, then he says that actually Gopal Bhatta did the first work on these Sandarbhas, and later on Jiva Goswami took that work and put it in a more, systematic order, and he added portions which were incomplete, and that became the Sandarbhas. So Jiva Goswami gives Gopal Bhatta the credit for doing the first work on the Sandarbhas. But that's one work he contributed to. The other work is the Hari Bhakti Vilas, which is quite a large work also, 20 chapters, each about 500 to 1,000 verses each. Very large work. Mostly about deity worship. Of course, also it involves the daily activities of the Vaishnava, and it covers things like initiation, getting the mantra, daily cleanliness, etc., bathing, dressing, putting on tilak, and then worshiping the deity daily, all the different rules, etc., and then all the rules for festivals during the different months of the year, like Janmashtami, Nrsimha Chaturdasi, Ram Navami, Damodar month, etc. All those rules are covered in 2 chapters. And after that, he goes through installation of deities, how to install deities. And then after that, how to construct temples. So it's quite a huge work, and it's a compilation of quotations from different Puranas and Pancharatra, like Harisarsha Pancharatra. It's quite an extensive work. So that work is done by Sanatana Goswami, with the assistance of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So very, very big work. So these two works are the most of the literary contribution of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Additionally, there is one work called the Satkriya Sardipika and the Samskar Dipika, smaller works, which describe the samskars for the Gaudiya Vaishnava, how he will do the samskars without having to worship devatas. So that's the work which was discovered, I think, by Bhaktivinoda Thakur and was published by the Gaudiya Math. So that's another work he wrote. He was also significantly famous because he became the Diksha Guru of Srinivasacharya, who's one of the next generation after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates. He was the next generation, one of the famous preachers and gurus. So that was Srinivasacharya. So he took initiation from Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So Srinivasacharya, Narottam Das, and Shamananda, they came and they stayed in Vrindavan and studied under the Goswamis. So Srinivasacharya took his initiation from Gopal Bhatta Goswami. The other famous thing is that Gopal Bhatta Goswami founded the Radharaman temple. And that Radharaman temple is one of its fame is that Radharaman was a deity that manifested by the devotion of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So the story is that he went up to the Gandaki River, which is in Nepal, and there he got 12 Shalagram Shilas out of the Gandaki River, and he brought those back to Vrindavan. And he was worshipping those 12 Shalagram Shilas. And then one time, one wealthy person donated some ornaments for his deity. And then Gopal Bhatta Goswami said, "Oh, well, very nice, but it's only a shalagram, so you have bracelets and crown and stuff, necklaces. I can't put them on the deity because he's only a shalagram." So he was somewhat lamenting the situation. And then he did daily worship of the shalagram, and he put the shalagram to rest, to sleep himself after that. And then in the morning he came to do his worship, and then he opened his bag of shilas, and there were 11 shilas, and there was the Radharaman deity. So one of the shilas, which is roundish, had transformed into this form of Radharaman deity, who has a head and arms and legs, etc. So that deity is still there in Vrindavan today and is worshipped by the descendants of one of his disciples from that time. So that deity became very famous because it manifested because of that desire of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So this shows how the shalagram is non-different from the Lord, but then again, the Lord is willing to fulfill the desires of the devotee. So he manifests himself in the form of Krishna. So after that, Gopal Bhatta Goswami was able to dress his deity nicely and put the crown and the ornaments on the deity, just as he had desired to do. So he was very devoted to that deity. And then finally, a temple was built around that. So therefore, that temple also is still there today, and that deity is still worshipped with the nice standards that were set up by Gopal Bhatta and his descendants there, his disciples and their descendants. Prabhupada remarked that this is one temple which has very good standards that we in ISKCON can also try to emulate. That the wonderful standards of regularity and offerings they have for the deity and the way they dress the deity and the nice festivals they hold for the deity. So in this way, the deity worship was very impressive even to Srila Prabhupada. So as I said, that was a remnant of that tradition that started with Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and then he had his disciples, his immediate disciples, and one of them became head pujari, and then his family members later on, for generations, for the next 450 years or so, they've carried on that worship in that temple very steadily, in a very nice manner. So even today, it is very impressive to see that wonderful worship. So it all started with Gopal Bhatta Goswami and his devotion to that shalagram, which actually became the Radharaman deity. So that's the story of that particular deity. So the Goswamis in general were ordered by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to, one, write literatures to support whatever Lord Chaitanya had taught them, because he didn't write much at all. We have attributed to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu the Shastashtaka, but nothing else. So he entrusts the written word to the Goswamis, and therefore Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Raghunath Das, Gopal Bhatta, they dedicated themselves to writing all of this literature. So because of that, we have the foundational works of our Gaudiya Sampradaya. So that started in Vrindavan. And as I said, Gopal Bhatta was instrumental in doing that, because he was the inspiration for, he laid the groundwork for the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami, which is Jiva Goswami's main work. And the Hari Bhakti Vilas, which he contributed to with Sanatana Goswami, that is we could say the Gaudiya Vaishnava Smriti. This is the work we go to for consulting rituals, for understanding what the rituals we do in relation to deity worship and daily activities. This was established by Sanatana and Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So this way had a very great contribution to play. As I said, in general, that was one of the roles of the Goswamis, to write works, and therefore they're constantly engaged in doing so. The other order of Lord Chaitanya was to establish deities, or not so much deities, but to find out the places of Krishna's pastimes, which they also did. And then, of course, they established deities there in commemoration of those pastimes. And those, because of that, those temples are famous today. So we have among them, of course, the Radharaman temple there. And then we have Sanatana Goswami's temple, Madan Mohan, and Rupa Goswami's Govinda temple. Very, very famous temples there in Vrindavan. So this is all by the instruction of Lord Chaitanya. So because of that, Vrindavan became a famous place. If we see at the time when Lord Chaitanya came there, there was really nothing there. It was a little village, and none of the places were excavated. And Lord Chaitanya was looking for Radha Kund, and then finally he went to a paddy field and he discovered it in the paddy field. So there was not too much there. So that's why he ordered the Goswamis to investigate and find out all the different places. So then as a result of that, we have all the famous kundas and Govardhan Hill and the Jamuna and all the other pastime places known today because of the work of the Goswamis. And of course, the other thing was the temples. So because of all the wonderful places, the wonderful temples that became established there over the years, then this place became attractive to people to come to. So they began attracting many pilgrims. So over the last 500 years, Vrindavan has grown up as a great pilgrimage site as well. And in this way, Krishna gets more glorification because of that. So those were some of the contributions of the Goswamis in general, and Gopal Bhatta contributed to both of these things, that is the temple aspect and the writing work, the literary work. Okay? The other thing, of course, is their actual conduct. So we see in the Sad Goswami Astaka there that the Goswamis are praised because of their great devotion to the Lord, their great ecstasy, and their selfless attitude, and their complete detachment from everything in the material world. Complete absorption in Krishna and nothing to do with the material world at all. Always talking about Krishna, always enjoy serving Krishna, and no service to Maya at all. So all of the Goswamis are examples of that, including Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So Lord Chaitanya gave him this piece of his kopan and some renounced cloth. So Gopal Bhatta Goswami took that up, and he became like a Babaji there in Vrindavan, very renounced, and no attachment to anything material. So he set a very good example for everybody by showing absorption in Krishna and complete detachment from everything in the material world. So along with the other Goswamis, therefore, he set a very good example. The Goswamis in general, as I said, established the foundation of the movement by writing the philosophical works and setting a good standard there. And the disciple of Gopal Bhatta Goswami was Srinivasa Acharya. So after studying under the Goswamis, taking Diksha from Gopal Bhatta Goswami, learning everything nicely, then he went back to Bengal with all that knowledge. So they actually put all the Jiva Goswami collected all the works in the palm-leaf manuscript, and they put them in a cart, all the different works, and then they loaded everything up, and they took that cart back to Bengal, so that the devotees in Bengal would have access to all of that literature, which is in Sanskrit. In Bengal, of course, there were writers like Vrindavan Das Thakur, but a lot of the work in Bengal was in Bengali. But all of this work was in Sanskrit, the works of the Goswamis. So all of this work went back to Bengal. And in this way, let's say the foundational philosophical, theological, and achar works arrived in Bengal, and the Bengali devotees therefore could study them and have a basis for their expanding movement also. So in this way, the Srinivasa Acharya was also instrumental in doing that, taking the books back. And as a disciple of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, he also was an enthusiastic preacher. So he actually established a good movement, a good following in Bengal. He was also proficient at music, so he even started on some sort of musical lineage as well for doing kirtan. So in this way, the lineage of Gopal Bhatta continued through Srinivasa Acharya and went onwards like that. So in this way, the Gopal Bhatta contributed a lot to the initial phase of the movement and laying the foundations for the Gaudiya Sampradaya. He was a very, very competent person. At the moment, actually, I am translating the Hari Bhakti Vilas. I'm just in the last chapter now. I got 2 pages to go. It's taken a few months to do that with the commentary as well. So if you ever get a chance to read that, you'll see it's a little bit technical and whatever. Some areas are very technical, doing with installation or establishing deities or all the complex rules for whatever. So it shows the great extent of knowledge that Gopal Bhatta and Sanatana Goswami had at that time, in spite of the fact that there were no libraries available, except maybe a king's library someplace, which wasn't available in Vrindavan. Yet, somehow or other, they quoted all these works extensively. Most of the Hari Bhakti Vilas is quotations, thousands of pages of quotations, which they either memorized or somehow they got a palm-leaf manuscript of the book somehow or other, I don't know how, in Vrindavan. And they were able to write these works like this. So it's quite an amazing feat to see all these quotations. There, the Matsya Purana, the Vishnu Purana, Paishirsha Pancharatra, things from the Vedas, other Puranas like Skanda Purana, etc., constantly quoting. So it shows the great erudition of the Goswamis and Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So as I said, he was educated when he was in South India, and then he went to Vrindavan. So maybe he picked up a lot of, got memorized all of the scriptures when he was a young man, and he kept them in his head, and therefore he could quote them very nicely in Hari Bhakti Vilas. So the work shows the great erudition of the Gopal Bhatta and Sanatana Goswami who writing that work. In the other work of Sanatana Goswami, we don't see so much quotations from scripture. It's more of a story from that is Brihad Bhagavatamrita. That's the other big work of Sanatana Goswami. Only at the end of the work, we got some verses to glorify Goloka Vrindavan, but otherwise, it's not so many quotations there. But this work here, we have excessive quotations after quotations. So many quotations there. So somehow or other, it seems that Gopal Bhatta had a great knowledge of all of these different works. I said he was from South India, so it's interesting to note that actually the ancestors of Rupa and Sanatan also came from South India. Of course, they were living in Bengal. I think the ancestors were in immediate ancestors from Bangladesh. But actually, their more distant relatives came from Karnataka in South India, Brahman family down there. So therefore, Rupa and Sanatan's ancestry comes from South India, and Gopal Bhatta also comes from South India. So we see some South Indian influence there. And as we know, many of these persons, like in South India, they did have access to many scriptures. So Gopal Bhatta came from Venkat Bhatta's family, who were the head pujaris of Sriranga temple. So they would have a lot of scriptures available to them because that was a huge temple. Whereas Vrindavan was nothing there. They were just living in little huts, and there were no temples there at that time. But Gopal Bhatta would have the opportunity in South India to study many scriptures because there was, the temple was the biggest, actually, the biggest temple, biggest Vishnu temple in the world at the moment, I suppose. And even then, it was considered to be a very great temple. So it had a lot of support behind it, a lot of finances behind it, a lot of support from the king. So therefore, all these books were available. And Gopal Bhatta Goswami would have opportunity to study all these works when he was a young man. So probably that's how we have so many quotations here in the Hari Bhakti Vilas. So, and the whole purpose of this work, of course, is a little technical, and we could say maybe it's too many rules and regulations, but it's been written in order to at least establish a scriptural authority for worshiping the deities and building temples, etc., because otherwise we don't have any foundational works. So this can act as a foundation upon which we can base our own rules for worshiping the deities, etc., which is what we've done. It's somewhat simplified, but we do have to have some authority behind our method of deity worship. So ultimately, we have to go back to Hari Bhakti Vilas, which is based upon scriptures. So this way, we can do our deity worship. We can observe our festivals. We can install deities. We can build temples based upon some scriptural evidence. Otherwise, we would have to go to other works which aren't even within our sampradaya. So at least this gives some filter for us so that we can take something which is approved by the acharyas. Okay, Hare Krishna. Any questions there?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maharaj, for wonderfully covering this entire topic about Gopal Bhatta Goswami Prabhupada. If you can elaborate on some of the points, I was thinking, reflecting. The first one is how Gopal Bhatta Goswami Prabhupada was developed his personal rasa relationship, intense mood of service to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and that carried on to even the deity himself manifesting from Shaligram Shila. From both angles, if we can cover how to simplify it in terms of deity worship, and at the same time, how we can do also elaborately at the temple setting. And also the second aspect is Hari Bhakti Vilas, as you mentioned already, that there are a lot of rules and regulations. So, as a devotee, as a practitioner, what we can take and what to implement what to follow. Because otherwise, we may get caught up with too many rules on Ekadasi. This you can't eat, that you can't eat. You have to shave. You have to do this. So many things. So, what is the best way for a practitioner to follow? If you can elaborate on that. Yeah. Thank you so much, Maharaj.
Well, as for the rules and regulations, yes, many rules and regulations are here in, concerning Ekadasi, etc., observing Jamastami, festivals, and for worship, daily achar, etc., which we will find a little excessive. So, repeatedly within this work itself, the comment is that, and the commentary especially, is that, of course, they say we are always taking from, authorized devotees, but you should follow your sampradaya. You should follow your tradition. So therefore, whatever is here is adapted by, let's say, the temple of Radharaman. They will use some of these rules, but not everything, but a amount of rules. And then they have their tradition they follow. So similarly, in our particular line, and other temples also have their particular way of doing things, like in Govinda temple which is in Jaipur now. Then they have their particular tradition and how they do it, which is based upon Hari Bhakti Vilas, but not everything is done. They select certain things to do. Similarly, of course, we'll find that not only in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, we'll find that even, let's say, in the Ramanuja Sampradaya. They don't do everything that's mentioned in the Pancharatras. They have a selection of things. So they make their own manual out of all those scriptures. And then based on that, then the Acharya will tell them, okay, we'll do this, this, and this. And that's how they establish their particular method of worshiping the deity. So similarly, we are coming in a line from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati to Srila Prabhupada. So therefore, we follow that particular way of doing things, which is quite a lot simpler in many ways. Nevertheless, it's also practical, because we'll see that in our sampradaya, though we do have deity worship, the emphasis of Lord Chaitanya was always on Nam Sankirtan. This is the Yuga Dharma. This is our main sadhana. So that's always the main interest. And that we do deity worship, it is always in a second place. It's not that it predominates, it's in a second place. So therefore, the main emphasis we put is upon chanting Hare Krishna and preaching the name, etc., spreading the mercy of the name to all people. So that's our main activity. So everything, all the activities like deity worship, etc., are supporting that. It's not that they are eclipsing, that the deity worship will eclipse the kirtan. No, it's the other way around. The Sankirtan is supported by everything else. Nevertheless, we don't want to minimize the deity in any way. So therefore, we do follow certain rules, but we keep it within the principles established by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Srila Prabhupada, which means some things are quite simplified. We don't get hung up too much on the great details. And in this way, we do what is favorable for our main intention, which is to preach the holy name. And everything is secondary to that. So therefore, we do things, but we simplify things so that they don't get too cumbersome for us to follow. That's the basic principle behind it. So in this way, we do deity worship, but we don't make it too complicated so that nobody can ever learn it or whatever. So more people can participate and support it. And at the same time, we don't spend all of our time doing the deity worship and no time preaching. So everything has its place. So there's a nice balance there we have between the Harinam and the Pancharatrik Vinis follow. And we're following our particular line. So that's the balance that we have.
Thank you, Maharaj. Dear devotees, anyone else has questions on this topic or on the deity worship or any other ones? You can raise your hand or put in the chat. No one has any questions. Amritanand Prabhu, go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Maharaj, my question is, you mentioned that Mahaprabhu had instructed the Goswamis to find out the different temples of, where they were in Vrindavan. So I'm thinking that during that time, was worship of Krishna in Vrindavan abandoned?
Okay. Well, we see that when Lord Chaitanya went there, of course, there was a big temple in Mathura, the Keshava temple at that time, which was later destroyed by the Muslims. So there was a big temple in Mathura there. Also on Govardhan Hill, there was that temple of Srinath. The Srinath deity was near there someplace, worshipped. And then later they took that away. So there were a few temples there. But of course, the temples that we know now, the famous ones, those were established by the Goswamis. So the places also were kind of known, like we have Lord Chaitanya going to the place of Kaliya, for instance. So there was something there people knew about that place. So a few named places were there, just as we find in Mayapur, named places were there, but nobody quite knew what was happening. So the Bhaktivinoda Thakur then went and discovered all the places again in Navadvip. So similarly, there was places with names, so that people thought maybe the places. So some things were there, but a little sketchy, and no not many temples. There was a few temples, but not much around. So therefore, all of this was, you could say, investigated by the Goswamis. And of course, they even found things like deities, etc. Narayan Bhatta also, there was a Dauji temple in Mathura side, I think Mahavana, Dauji temple, the Balaram temple. So that was discovered by Narayan Bhatta, who was a disciple of, I think, Gadadhar Pandit. So he discovered that Dauji deity there. And similarly, of course, Madhavendra Puri had discovered that deity before also. So there were different deities which were there, but not so many. And some were lost, undiscovered, so they had to get recovered again. And the place names were there, but Radhakund was somewhere, but they didn't quite know where it was. So Lord Chaitanya discovered that. So it was kind of in a dilapidated state. Where some names were there, but nobody knew too much about it. So with careful investigation there, all these things like the forests and everything were rediscovered based on scripture and names and whatever evidence they had. So that's naturally happens even with Lord Chaitanya. 500 years ago, Lord Chaitanya was, only 500 years ago. Krishna was 5,000 years ago. So it's a long time before Lord Chaitanya, before Krishna and up to the Goswamis, long thousands of years. Whereas from Navadvip, from Lord Chaitanya's time to the present, it's only 500 years. But even then, things get lost. So they just had a few named places like Balal Digi and places like this. So based on that, Lord Chaitanya, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was able to locate like the Chankazi's place and other landmarks there, and where the ghats, the different ghats on the river. So in this way, in 500 years, things had got even lost there, and a few names were only there. So Lord Bhaktivinoda Thakur had to rediscover everything based on the names, based on old maps of the British and before that. So it's a little cumbersome procedure, but if one investigates closely, we can come to some conclusions. This is the nature of time. The time destroys everything. We have short memories, so things get lost. Time destroys things. Kala is a destructive element, so temples get destroyed and covered with dust, whatever like that.
Yeah.
In a larger scale, of course, we know that the whole world's like that. Everything gets covered up. And then suddenly they discover Pompeii under the ashes. They didn't know it was there. But yeah, it was supposed to be there, but then no one knew until maybe 150 years ago. They started digging up, and the whole city was under there. like that. So even now they go and discover a new city someplace in Greece or Turkey or somewhere else, thousands of years old. Or in Egypt also, they're discovering things, always digging things up and discovering, oh, here's a new city. So this is a few thousand years ago also, and still things get lost. So same with Lord Krishna and all of his pastimes, etc., bound to get lost because of the nature of time, and particularly Kali Yuga, where things get more easily destroyed and people forget more easily.
Thank you, Maharaj.
And that is why, because of that, the whole destructive element of time, etc., that is why it's very important that we do have some things preserved. So that's why Lord Chaitanya told them to write books and preserve those things, even though it was not the most permanent form. Palm leaf manuscripts was not very permanent, but that was the best they could do at that time. So they preserved those and they sent them off to Bengal also. So in that way, it's come down over the last 500 years at least. So that we got the actual original teachings. Otherwise, if we don't have those in the modern day, we can concoct anything, because as we know, each generation people put a new turn on the philosophy and the way of doing things. So we end up with something completely different after a few hundred years. So that's why we do have the emphasis upon scripture.
Maharaj, if I may ask a follow-up question on deity worship. There are these rituals and the proper way of doing it. Of course, as you mentioned, that in the ISKCON Sampradaya, it is simplified so that more and more people could engage in it. Maharaj, my question is, how do we develop attachment for the deities rather than just go through it mechanically?
Yeah. Well, originally, all of these rules were there as part of the process by which we could channel our devotion properly. So in other words, the rules were there to control the senses, to control the mind, to create a purity in the body, etc., which makes it easier to concentrate on the Lord. So that's, of course, we can say even in the whole Brahminical life of the Nitya Kriyas, the daily activities you do as a Brahmana, like taking a bath and chanting mantras and doing whatever, doing Sandhya Vandanas and homas every day. That's all there just actually to control the mind and keep it out of material thoughts and whatever like that. And then finally you can chant the Vedas. The idea is to chant the Vedas there. So for us, it's not chanting the Vedas, it's chanting Hare Krishna, of course, and developing our devotion to Krishna. So the deity worship also was meant for that in Pancharatra. But of course, these rules are coming from, thousands of years ago also. This is the method for Kali Yuga, of course, for deity worship. But still, with Lord Chaitanya, as I said, Nam Sankirtan becomes more prominent, and therefore deity worship is less. So therefore, those rules, we're not so much interested in them as we are in chanting the holy name. But at least if we're going to do deity worship as an assistant to Nam Sankirtan, as the Goswamis did, they had deities also. Like Gopal Bhatta had his deity, Rupa Goswami had his deity, Sanatana Goswami had his deity, Raghunath Das had his deity. They all had their individual deities. So they did have deity worship also. We do that, and we should follow the rules, but particularly for us, we're more into the preaching movement, etc. So therefore, it all has to serve the preaching movement. So the deity worship should be there, but to keep the rules from overcoming us, then we have the holy name. So by cultivating the holy name and developing our devotion to that, then the devotion to the deity doesn't get caught up in all the rules and regulations too much. So in other words, along with chanting the deity worship, we always have to chant the holy name. So along with all the other activities, as Harinam Sankirtan and chanting the holy name. And this is where we get our main devotion from, our main bhakti. And therefore, when we do the deity worship, we won't get lost in the ritual. And instead of helping it develop devotion, we become ritualized in our devotion. And it becomes more like a formality or a ritual. And we like doing rituals. Some people like doing rituals, so we get caught up in the ritual rather than in the bhakti part of it. But as I said, the whole idea was the ritual was there to reinforce the bhakti but somehow generally we get into the ritual too much and the bhakti gets lost. So to prevent that, then we do have Nam Sankirtan to keep up the bhakti there and not get us too much involved in the ritual.
Thank you. Thank you, Maharaj.
Jagadish Prabhu, go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Danvat Pranam, all gurus to you, all gurus Prabhupada. My humble obeisances in your lotus feet. Maharaj, just I'm curious to know, like you mentioned before Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Braj, the Radha Kund, Syam Kund, and the Sri Govardhan, like discovered by that are 6 Goswamis. So just I want to know, like before that, what the Brajavasis doing? They were aware or this they were stopped this the worship. And second, like in the Braj, we see in our area, Maharaj, the Thakurji worship is so prominent. So that was there before 6 Goswamis, or like how this like just I'm trying to understand, Maharaj.
Well, as I said, there were the residents there. We don't know how long they were there or whatever. Maybe some moved there later on. Maybe some were there for 500 years. But if we really want to go back, we have to trace back 5,000 years or so, or 4,000 years. We can't do that. So, and of course, things get lost anyway. So therefore, there were some people there that had these names in their mind, different places, and by tradition, like Kali Yaga, etc. But not too much detail. And of course, they didn't know too much about these things because they were just farmers in general. So therefore, it depended on simply the traditional names of the places, more or less. That's how they had to start out. And of course, the Goswamis, if you go to scriptures, then they would see, to some extent, the locations of the different places based on that. In some of the Puranas, there is descriptions of the, this village is next to that village, is next to this village, and this is where Krishna did this, or this is where Krishna did that. So in that way, they could figure out some of the locations that way as well. So scripture is there. The other is tradition, which may or may not be reliable. We see for instance, in Navadvip, the tradition was that the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya was in Navadvip. And for hundreds of years, people believed that. But then Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, no, it's not there. It's on the Mayapur side, just across the river. So even the tradition may be wrong sometimes. So he concluded it was in Mayapur based upon scriptural evidence and the old maps. So tradition may be faulty too. So we go by as much as possible by scripture itself. So I suppose that's what the Goswamis did. They use scripture also to discover the different places, not just the local tradition of what the names were, which may be true, but may not be true also.
And Maharaj, like following the questions in the bridge, I belong to the same area, Maharaj. Like we say the Thakurji worship there, the Gopalji worship. So like is that before or it started after the 6 Goswamis? So how is that, Maharaj?
Which is that? Which deity?
Like in the Gopal worship, like in small the bridge, if you go the all houses keeping the small Gopal, the deity, and they call the Thakurji that one. So how this worship come in that picture?
The deity discovered by Madhavendra Puri, that one?
No, it's Bal Gopal, Maharaj.
That deity you're talking about, or a different deity?
No, Maharaj, like in general, every Brajavasi has a Bal Gopal, a small Krishna,
Oh,
in
now
the baby form. And then
Yeah.
we used to call that Thakurji. So how this worship started? It was before or it started after
I
that?
see. The present residents are generally the merchants there. But in Lord Chaitanya's time, it was mainly farmers, as far as I could see. There was no real town there. It was just a bunch of villagers farming, basically. So I don't know if the present people can be traced back to those people or whether they came later after the place grew. When the temples grew, then probably more people came and then we have traders and merchants, etc. So maybe the present people who are there are not the original people from 500 years ago. Maybe they're from 200 years ago or 300 years ago. I don't know for sure. Maybe you have to investigate, but you could probably find out if you're a historian. You can figure out, trace the lineage of different families there and see how far they go back.
Okay, Maharaj. Thank you so much, man.
Anil Kumar, Anil Prabhu, go ahead.
Hello, Prabhuji. Hello, Maharaj. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you in person. And just a quick question, and basically it's a continuation of the discussion we were having on the deity worship. Now, as you know, India has a multitude of deities, and just wanted to get your opinion on, and I think you did touch upon it, like when you say follow traditions, but I wanted to get clarification, like if I'm a new follower and we currently, as part of our tradition, worship many deities. India has many festivals, and as part of that tradition, we celebrate many festivals, Indian festivals, throughout the year. And as part of that tradition and festivals, we worship many deities associated with that, with a specific festival. Like Diwali would have Lord Rama. We have Ganesh Chaturthi with Lord Ganesha. Then we have Mahashivratri with Lord Shiva, and so on and so forth. So just wanted to, as far as ISKCON is concerned, how do we look at worshipping other deities as part of the ISKCON culture?
Well, generally we try to follow what's in Hari Bhakti Vilas if there's a doubt. So therefore we can follow those rules. So of course, I think as far as I know, Ganesh Chaturthi is a modern festival. It's not so ancient. It became very popular, I think, in the last 100 years or so in Bombay, and it started off there, went around everywhere. And similarly in South India, we have what is it, Ayappa, which is also a modern thing that happened last 50 years or so. So some of them are a little modern. Others probably go back more like Kali Puja or something, or Saraswati Puja, are probably older than that. In Bengal, maybe 500 years or so, maybe more even. But in Hari Bhakti Vilas, basically it is Vaishnava festivals like Rama, etc., whatever. Plus they also have, I think Shiva. Shiva is there. Shiva gets a little mention there. Shivratri gets a mention because he's actually a form of Vishnu. But the attitude of the Vaishnava is that if we're going to, we're not forbidden from respecting. We're supposed to respect all devatas, but we have to consider them in the proper way. That is, they are devotees of Vishnu. So in other words, all these other deities are actually serving Vishnu. So that's how we worship them. And that Vishnu is the final absolute. Vishnu and Krishna are the absolute, and they are servants of them. So that we can respect them, but we respect them as servants, just as we worship also the Vaishnavas. We worship the Acharyas. We worship the Goswamis, etc., because they are servants of the Lord. So, but we're not forbidden from doing that. We encourage that people worship. So therefore, we respect the devatas because they're also servants of the Lord. And we'll see in like even Hari Bhakti Vilas say, okay, we worship the Lord, but then you worship his associates afterwards. So you worship Brahma and Shiva and Ganesh and Durga afterwards as the servants of him and give him the prasad, Vishnu prasad. So that's basically how the Vaishnava is going to worship these other deities, if that's our tradition, whatever. Others, of course, who are more absorbed in Krishna, then they find it, they're only going to worship Krishna, so they don't want to spend their time worshiping anybody else, so and be distracted, so therefore they only worship Krishna. But at the same time, we never disrespect the devatas. And we can worship them, but we worship them in the proper way, that's all.
All right. Thank you so much. Just one point on your, one follow-up on based on what you said. So for a new follower, how would you explain the relationship between Vishnu and Krishna? I mean, I've started reading, but I need some clarification on how do you relate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, they're non-different. And this is mentioned in by Rupa Goswami. in terms of tattva or in terms of their ontological nature, they're one entity. In other words, one person may show himself in different ways, but he's only one person. So Bhagavan can show himself as Rama or as Krishna or as Varaha or Nrsimhadev, but he's actually, it's not different persons. It's the same person, but by extraordinary power, he can manifest different forms. Just as the moon is one moon only, but it's Purnima on one day, and then it gets a little smaller the next day, a little smaller the next day, until one day it's Amavasya. But it's one moon.
Mhm.
So the Lord is one, but he puts on different faces, like in Nrsimhadev with a lion's head, or Varaha as a boar, or as Ramchandra as a gay king, or Krishna as a cowherd boy, but he's one God.
Right.
So it's only one God, but he takes these different forms. So Shiva is also a form like that, but we distinguish him a little bit. He's also God, but he manifests a little bit less powers, just as Rama manifests a little less powers than Krishna, or Vishnu manifests a little less powers than Ramchandra. So Shiva manifests a little less powers. He hides his powers than Vishnu, and he confines himself mainly to tamagun, destruction of the universe, dancing and destroying everything. It's like this, like that. So he's in charge of tamagun. So he limits himself more. God in that form. So we put him in a separate category because of that. But actually, he's non-different from Vishnu also. But the others, like Devatas, many of them are jivas. They're not even God. But God gives them special powers. So they're almost, they can control the wind, control the water, control the weather, control the sun, etc. But they're actually not God at all. They're jivas like us with more powers. So we can't worship them in the same level.
Okay. Got it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Maharaj. Jagadish Prabhu, you have still question? No. Okay.
No, Prabhu, by mistake, I think that is
Okay. Yeah. Just one letter so Prabhupada written to His Grace, Sri Govinda Das in 1974, December 6th, Bombay. Prabhupada is writing. So you are intelligent boys. Book distribution is Bhagavat Marga and temple worship is Pancharatri Vidhi. Both are important for cultivating Vaishnavism. But comparatively speaking, Bhagavat Marga is more important than Pancharatri Vidhi. As far as possible, both should go on the parallel lines, but still Bhagavat Marga is more important than the other. So you are all intelligent boys. You should judge the desire of my Guru Maharaj and help me in that way. Regarding the temple management, one man can be left behind while the others go out to take deity. And you can come home at night and take prasadam sumptuously. Once eating sumptuously is enough to maintain body and soul together. In the daytime, you may not take. At night, you can take. As a matter of fact, a devotee may take only once in a day, either in the day or night. And whenever you eat, you must first offer. But I do not mean you should neglect temple life. Do not misunderstand this. But one can remain. So far, other devotees are concerned, they can eat once in a day or night. After having kirtana, then 6 hours of sound sleep, this will maintain their health properly. So on the above statement, you must make some compromise. Both Tripurari and yourself are intelligent. Sometimes we may differ, but Krishna is in the center. Just like in Vrindavan, there is Radharani's party, there is Chandravali's party. So Krishna is the center of both parties. So even if there is competition between the parties, but they coincide in Krishna. So making it clear. Madhubati Prabhu, anything you want to say?
No, thank you very much, Maharaj. It was wonderful hearing from you after a long time. Please
Hare
come
Krishna.
more often.
Right.
Maharaj, I had a quick question. As you mentioned that our Goswamis wrote on palm leaves. And I believe in Srinivas Acharya's time, the first Sankirtan movement had started. Srinivas Acharya, Narottam Das Thakur, and Shyamanda Pandey. How was that? How did it go from palm leaves to publication mode? Because the publishing started many years later.
Yeah, that's what the British.
Yeah.
I don't know when did the British come? 1700s,
Yeah,
1800s.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it must have taken a little while to get the scriptures into printed works and whatever. They had to typeset them, and even printing at that time was not like computerized laser printing. It was, typeset little thingies with lead fonts, and then you have to roll it through the hand press or something like that. Probably a hand press. So it was a little primitive then, but of course it was easier. It was a little more easier than handwriting everything on palm leaf manuscripts. So, but that had to come with the British. So only after they had established themselves in India, then probably maybe take 100 years for them to develop that whole thing and get the scriptures printed. So that, like when Bhaktivinoda Thakur was there in the 1800s, then I think at that time, the Gaudiya Vaishnava works began to be printed. And he was trying to get like Chaitanya Charitamrita to print it, but actually everybody had heard about it, but nobody had actually seen a copy of it.
Oh. Okay.
So then one person said, oh yes, somewhere in the closet in one of our trunks, we have a copy of it, but he had not even looked at the book. It was just stuck there. It must have been palm leaf manuscripts or something, but he hadn't even read the darn thing, but he'd heard about it. That's all. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he actually made a great endeavor to finally print that work. So maybe that was I don't know if it was the first printed copy. It looks like it was because he couldn't find any copies around and he had to look around here or there. So he managed to print it. So that was 1850s or something. He was doing that. So that was quite late. So it's only after that time, I think, that the Gaudiya works started getting printed. And before that, no one was making much endeavor for that. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur was one of the first persons who started doing that.
Okay.
So that's not so far in the past, actually.
Yeah.
150 years ago or something, we say.
Yeah.
So before that, it was palm leaf manuscripts, and of course, some things get lost, some things get thrown out, some things decay. People forget about them and they don't know what they are, so they burn them for firewood or whatever like that. Throw them in the river on this occasion or that occasion to get rid of the junk in the house. So many things get destroyed like that in ancient times.
Yeah.
So many of the works seem to be lost now because of that. So apparently, like Baladev Vijayabhusan wrote commentaries on 10 Upanishads. We don't have that. We have one left. One Upanishad out of 10 Upanishads. So we don't have the other ones. Luckily, we do have the. And that was one thing that I think the Brahma Sutra commentary of Gopal Baladev was there, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur heard about it in Puri because he was the magistrate there, and he knew that the king had a library, and he was talking with the librarian guard, and he said, "Yes, there's a copy of Baladev's commentary in the library there." So I think he paid him money to copy the whole thing out, and that way he got the manuscript copied, and then based on that he was able to study it. But it's very rare, very difficult to get these works, even in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's time.
Okay. Thank you, Maharaj. Yeah. So Maharaj will like to invite you whenever you come to this part of the world, US, please visit us. I know years back you came to Tobacco.
Oh yeah, a long time ago. You were there?
Yeah, I was there.
Oh, okay.
I met you. Yes.
Yeah, Madhupati Prabhu is our temple president. He used to be also president of Tobacco also for some years. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, travel a little difficult these days.
Yeah.
Due to the virus, there's always restrictions on travel and whatever.
Yeah. But mostly you spend time in Chennai or?
Well, I've been sitting here for the last year mostly because of COVID. I was sitting for 1 year in Australia because of COVID also before I came back here. Finally, I came back.
Okay.
I would like to have maybe I'll communicate with you Maharaj for the Gaur Purnima. You can give us 1 or 2 sessions in March, and then
I'll
maybe
try.
later on deity worship. We can have some sessions on how to improve and how to make sure standards are maintained on the deity worship.
Okay, I guess so.
You can let us know, Maharaj. I know during Gaur Purnima time, the GBC meetings, Maharaj is also part of the GBC EC.
Yeah, I'll be the chairman next year.
Yeah. I'm so glad.
I'll see how busy I am.
We have to get your time this year better than next year. Next year will be more busy then.
Yeah, most likely.
Thank you so much, Maharaj.
Okay, fine. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Pancha kalpatarubhyasya kripa sindhubhyo pattanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namo. Vaishnavaki jai.
Hey. Thank you so much, Maharaj.
Gopal ki jai. Quick announcements.